So to get started, I do have a
Now?
chat activity. So today we're going to be talking about giving students feedback. And so what I'd like you to do first is to think about, for yourself, what is the best thing about getting feedback? And so if you haven't opened your chat window, please open that up and type your response. So what's the best thing about getting feedback? And then I'm going to have you wait to send it, and we'll send them all at once so you can then read everybody's responses. So take a minute and just in the chat type what's the best thing about getting feedback.
Okay, so we will do this as well. So everybody feel free to put in the chat what you think is the best thing, and don't hit send. We'll give it a moment. Okay, go ahead and hit send. And we'll see what comes in. Okay, so I see it makes me feel that I am learning and succeeding. Yes, it can be very affirming. Understanding from student. Yeah, giving feedback helps you know what they understand, right? So here, small scale reinforces that I got something right. Okay, so it's feedback for you as well. And large scale overall reaffirms my humanity, honors the learning process. I like that. Yes, it honors the student's effort. It honors their learning. Feeling encouraged and receiving help. Helps me know how I am doing. To help direct my next move. Yeah, without feedback, you could be on the wrong track and not know it. This helps you figure out where to go next. Know if I have been understood. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to listen to the responses that they got in the video.
All right. So I see a few people have sent things. Good. So you can adjust your plans if necessary, knowing that you're on track, or if you need to adjust your course of action. Makes you feel someone is paying attention to your work and that your progress is important. Reinforcing that you're doing well or help with areas that can be improved. Helps you understand your progress, knowing what to keep and what to change. And I love affirmation. I love that. I think most of us can probably identify with many of those things. And to ensure our efforts are not wasted, that we're doing what's expected for the job or school. Yeah, I think that's true. So that knowing, and I like a couple people said that knowing somebody is paying attention is really important. And that's definitely an important part of giving feedback to our students as well. And then knowing what you're doing well as maybe what needs to be changed. So we're going to do the same activity again, but I'm going to change the question because I know feedback isn't always the thing that we look forward to. What is the worst thing about getting feedback?
Okay, so same thing. Go ahead and answer in the chat, and then we'll discuss.
Roberta, I can't send my messages. I don't know how to do that. So.
Okay, are you on an iPhone or
I'm on
iPad
a
or
laptop.
laptop?
I didn't want you to think I wasn't participating, but I don't know
Okay.
how to do that. So,
Okay, when I have everyone hit the chat, you can
Yeah.
go ahead and give yours orally.
yeah, it does. I don't, whatever.
Okay, no,
Okay.
that's fine. We'll be discussing.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and hit send. And if you're still typing, that's fine. Okay. Yes, discouraging, especially if you continue to misunderstand. That's not at all encouraging. Yeah. If I had a big ego, it would hurt my ego to learn I did something wrong. Even if you don't have a big ego, it never feels good, right? Okay. Or if I was a perfectionist, I'd be disappointed in myself. Yeah. You know, mistakes are the way we learn often, but it's hard to accept that sometimes if you are a perfectionist. Okay. Yeah, good. When the focus is too much on the feedback and the emotion behind it rather than the action needed. Sometimes it's hard for us to hear and accept what we need to do because we're wrapped up in how it makes us feel. Yeah, hearing you're not doing well, it's never nice, or that you're not getting through to the student. Yeah, it can be hard as a tutor to, that the student's mistakes are like feedback for you. Taking it too personally. Yeah. That can be discouraging when the student says, I don't understand, and you try to explain, but the student still doesn't understand. Trying to find a strategy that will actually help them understand. Yeah. Okay. And, okay, Megan, did you want to chime in? Or anyone else?
Yeah, I think it can be deflating because we all work so hard to put lessons together, but it gives you an opportunity to find a different way to present whatever the topic is. So
That's a good way to look at it. It gives you an opportunity. That's what
there you go.
feedback is. Yep. Okay, so now we will continue with Rachel and her group. If I can get back.
All right, so go ahead and send. Okay. So Janet says, hearing hard truths, if we are not doing well, it can deflate us. And if given harshly, can demotivate us, definitely. Doesn't always feel good to be corrected. And it's hard not to be defensive, even when you know the feedback is right. That's very true. That's something that I struggle with myself. When the feedback isn't relevant, definitely, or to find out you've been ineffective or on the wrong track. And I hate criticism because it makes me question my competence. That's definitely something I think many of us can identify with. Exposing myself to possible negative comments, and sometimes it's tough to face mistakes. So I think both the good things and the bad things about getting feedback are things that you want to hold in your mind when you're talking to your students, right? that sometimes getting feedback can be really affirming. It lets you know people are paying attention. It can show you what you're doing well, and sometimes show you, like, give you ideas for things you can do well, better in the future. But then it can be really hard sometimes to take feedback, especially if you're getting negative or harsh feedback, or if somebody's telling you things that aren't relevant. So those are things that we'll want to avoid when we're talking to students. All right, so I think we're all on pretty much the same page here about what is important and sort of how it can feel to receive feedback. So I'm gonna step back for a minute and we'll talk a little bit about what feedback is, and then I'll give you some more concrete pointers about what we can do when we're talking to students and working with students. So feedback is information that tells you whether or not you have met your goal. And it can also indicate how close you were to meeting your goal, or what you can do to improve. And before we get into all the things that we can tell our students, it's worth remembering that not all feedback is verbal, and not all of it even comes from another person. So sometimes you have automatic feedback. So if you throw a basketball, you don't normally need someone to tell you whether or not it went through the hoop, right? You can just see that. And automatic feedback can be really powerful because it allows the learner to get a feel for how well they're doing on their own. There are lots of online tools and applications that can be used to help students get automatic feedback. And some of them are really useful, but usually in most cases, learners are still going to need more information in order to help them improve their skills. So if you think about putting the basketball through the hoop, you can see whether the basketball went through the hoop or not, but you may not know why it didn't go through. So that's why you need the coach sometimes to tell you where to put your feet, how to bend your knees, where to put your hands, right? Or if with baking, if the bread rose, I mean, I love watching the Great British Baking Show. Sometimes they just say, this didn't rise long enough, right? Or sometimes they'll give really detailed feedback. You don't have enough salt, or you have too much flavoring. So there's a range of feedback there where sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes it's just, yes, this worked, no, this didn't work. If you're an expert, sometimes just seeing whether the ball went through the hoop is good enough. But for our students, they often need a little more feedback, right? So that's what we're going to be working on today, is how to give students a little more detail. So when you're responding to student work, there are 6 things that I'm going to be talking about particularly. The first thing is that you want to agree on the goal. So I think somebody said that it's not helpful to receive feedback that's irrelevant, right? So you and your student need to agree on the goal of what's important. You want to encourage self-evaluation so that the student learns when they're working how to tell whether they're on the right track. You always want to honor the student effort. Our students work really hard. Even just showing up sometimes is really a challenge for them. So you want to make sure, as we said, that they're getting that affirmation, somebody is paying attention, right? To unmute yourself or put something in the chat. I see some people, Faith had to leave because her internet connection is poor, but just feel free to use the chat if you have something you want to add. So as I said, agreeing on the goal is really important so that students know the point of what you're asking them to do. And this can go both ways. So you want to let them know what you are looking for in an activity, but also ask if there's something that they would like to get feedback on. It feels a lot better to receive feedback if you've asked for it. Even though sometimes it's still hard, at least you know why somebody is telling you what they are, right? And if you're a classroom aide, you can always check with the teacher about what the goal is if it's not clear, so that you know what to look for when you're talking to students. So for example, well, what subjects are you teaching right now? Somebody want to either speak up or put it in the chat what you're working on with your students? Ooh, science. Nice. Citizenship. Okay. So I'm reading your phonics. Good. So if you're working on science, you're probably doing a lot of reading and answering questions, right? With your student. So you might tell them, you know, for instance, in this reading, we're going to be looking at how the author is using evidence to back up their claim, right? And so you might, so then when you're talking to your student, you're saying the questions here are going to be about finding evidence. So that's what I'm going to be paying attention to. If there are words you don't understand, you can feel free to ask me, but we're going to be focusing on finding that evidence, right? Or if you're working on citizenship, you might want to, you know, that there are certain things that you're going to be looking at. So today we're just going to be looking at reviewing facts that we've talked about before, or we're going to be trying to learn some new facts. But always find out from the student if there's something that they want to work on. So the next thing is you want to encourage self-evaluation. So the student needs to know what the goal is for them to evaluate themselves. A lot of times our students have trouble with self-evaluation. Either they think that everything they do is bad, or sometimes they have an inflated sense that everything they do is good, right? And I'm sure you may have run into one or both of those types of students in your work. So it helps if you know what the student is thinking about their work. So if a student tells you, oh, I don't know how to do this, I'm not sure about doing this, then that's an opening for you to help show them how to do the skill or to reaffirm what they're doing that's right. If a student is very confident, then you also know you want to start with, oh yeah, you were right, you did do these things correctly. And it can help you frame what you're saying if you know what they already think they did right or wrong. But we do want to teach students to be a little more critical. So it's helpful to ask questions. What did you struggle with here? What was challenging? Or what do you feel like you did well? How does this compare with the last time we did this activity, right? So if you're doing a lot of memorization, so with phonics or citizenship, you're doing a lot of memorization, you can say, well, last time you got, 10 of these correct, this time you got 12. So that's a very concrete thing that you can teach the student to do. If you're working on a more holistic skill like speaking or writing, it can be helpful to have a checklist. And even if you're a classroom aide, you can always talk to the teacher about having 3 or 4 things that you should be checking in a student's work. So I want to say it's easy to get sort of wrapped up into making a lot of checklists and rubrics, but if you're working with just 1 or 2 students, usually just talking and asking a couple of open-ended questions is enough to help them to start to look at their work critically. And don't be afraid to use the answer key. I have been known to hand students the back of the book and just have them look through the answer key. And then they can tell me what they did right and what they did wrong. That's part of that automatic feedback. They're getting initially the automatic feedback of whether they answered the question right. And then you can give them more detail about how to improve. And we can look at, well, what did you do well here? What do we still need to work on? So something that we had talked about that some of you mentioned before was that feedback can really make you feel like somebody's paying attention. And so that's something that I want to dive into a little bit more here. When you are working with a student, you want to show that you are paying attention. So I have some examples here, but what's something that you do when you work with your students to show that you are giving them your attention? And
Okay, so we'll stop again. Go ahead and answer this question in the chat, okay? What is something you do to show your student that you are paying attention to their work? And you can just go ahead and hit send when you're done.
Send here.
Mhm. Good. A variety of affirmation words. Definitely. Give verbal feedback. Mhm. I listen very closely to their responses. Yeah, showing that you're really listening to your student is very affirming. Ask them a question for clarification of their answer. Yes, it shows you it's important to you that you understand them. Mhm. I taught them to say, excuse me, when they want to pay their own attention outside the class. And then I never use that. Have not taught it explicitly yet. Okay, I might ask for a little clarification on that. When you say they want to pay their own attention outside the class, Susan, could you explain what you mean there?
Yeah, so Spanish culture is like they do 6 things at once, where we like they don't make, like in some Spanish cultures anyways, they don't stand in line. They all hound the employee, and I don't know how the employee does it, but we stand in line. And so that comes out in English class because they're like, if somebody walks by, they have to say hi. And if somebody wants to ask them a question, it's okay to interrupt, and it's not okay with me. So I taught them, I said, if you want to do this, you need to say, excuse me. And I haven't explained it to them specifically yet. We haven't had that cultural lesson. But like, I never, like when you're in English class, you have my undivided attention. So I haven't said anything explicitly, but I'm working up to it.
Okay. Yeah, so attention has to go both ways, right? Yeah. Okay, very good. Look them in the eye when talking to them. Don't interrupt when they are talking. Yes, this is a bit more challenging on Zoom, where you can't really look someone in the eye unless you're looking at the little button. We do Zoom classes. I look at the student when the student is speaking. Sometimes I lean into the screen. Good. For spontaneous feedback, I use a clicker to say the target answer or response is correct. Great. So that gives immediate feedback. Okay, good. All right, so we'll see what they said.
attention. They did. you've just asked for their self-evaluation to rephrase and say, oh, yeah, so you said that you were struggling with, negative numbers or whatever it is, right?
I usually, when students are speaking, do a lot of kind of encouragement. Mind is definitely on Zoom because switching the speaker back. And so it's hard to just keep my mouth shut while they're speaking.
Yeah. So on Zoom, it can be hard because I also do that. And I find I always have to put myself on mute in these situations because I'm always going, oh, So, but there are other ways that you can show by, if you have your camera on, looking at the screen helps, right? Or you can still nod. But just, like Lynn said, rephrasing what somebody said, and really like, we'll talk about evidence next, but showing that you have paid close attention to what they're doing can be very helpful just in your response.
Rachel, somebody did type in, ask questions to clarify.
And asking questions to clarify. Exactly. Yeah. So that's a good way to get students to talk a little bit more to help improve their self-evaluation, but it also shows that you're paying close attention and that you really care about understanding. Sometimes when our students say things, you may not understand what they're saying, whether they're language learners or not, especially with technology. So then asking clarifying questions can help. And then I do have this one caveat here that unless you have a specific plan, you should always look over everything the student has completed before commenting or writing on their work. Especially as a new teacher, I would sometimes look at the first couple problems the student had did, think I knew what was going on, and then it would turn out that later on they fixed it, or they had, what they started out doing well had sort of like changed over the course of the essay or whatever. And so it's important to look at everything that they've done. So, and that will also help you decide what's most important to comment on. And I will say, if you end up in a classroom situation because you're a classroom aide, sometimes this doesn't involve telling other students, I'm sorry, I'm working with this, I'm working with Joe right now, I'll get to you in a minute, right? And that shows both students that you're taking your work seriously. So the next step that I have here is referring to evidence. Students are much more likely to improve their performance if you point out specific characteristics of their work that are strong or that need improvement. So this is part of why I titled this Beyond Good Job, right? It's okay to say good job, but then what do you follow up with so that the student knows what did they do that was good? Or what did, maybe everything wasn't good. What parts of it were good? So there are a few different ways that you can refer to evidence. So I always like to comment on students using strategies that we've worked on in class. So I noticed that you put the number back into the equation to check your work, or you broke the word into chunks and that helped you read it. So showing the student what they did that works. Sometimes students don't even realize that they're picking up these strategies. And so it's helpful to reflect back to them what they're doing. I also like to look for patterns. Rather than correcting every tiny little mistake, which can be sort of demoralizing, it can help to point out to the student what they're doing well and what they still need to work on. So all the nouns you chose are correct, but several of the articles are missing. Or you're dividing correctly, but you made some arithmetic mistakes with the multiplication and subtraction. So even though you aren't getting the right answer, you're still doing the process correctly. We just need to work on some math facts maybe. And then just other sorts of evidence to show students how well they're doing. So you read all but one of your sight words correctly on the first try, or every one of your examples is clearly connected to the main idea. And it's really important when you are giving students feedback that you're only focusing on one or two things. You want to choose the things that will make the most difference to the student right now. What's really going to improve their level of work? If the student is really struggling with many of the skills that are involved in an assignment, you can either choose one or two, choose the thing that's going to make the biggest difference, or you might just need to be giving the student easier work, or take some of those skills apart and work on them individually. So if the student's really struggling with multiplication and subtraction, maybe you need to review that before continuing with division, right? Or, this could be if a student's writing a whole essay and is practicing pulling everything together into an essay, that in itself is a challenging thing, and that's always going to involve a lot of skills. But you want to be clear with your student about that and make sure that they've mastered some of those smaller skills first. Maybe they've already written some paragraphs with topic sentences, or have practiced writing thesis statements before you start them on writing a whole essay. Right? And you'll notice that a lot of my feedback tends toward the positive, and that's intentional, because I always want to help students to build on their strengths. I always start with what the student did right. Even if it's just, I know this was really challenging and I'm proud of you for working through all the way to the end. Sometimes that's, sometimes just putting in that effort is the first step that they've needed to be working on. So what I like to do is to find something the student did right, and have them explain it to you. So for example, and in your second paragraph, I find I have a lot of writing examples here. In your second paragraph, you have a really clear topic sentence. What were you thinking as you wrote it? And how did you choose which details to include in that paragraph? Or I see that you have the correct answer for problem 1. How did you find the perimeter of that shape? And what did you do to figure out the missing sides? Would be sort of a math example. So you're asking them to explain to you what they did. That allows them to rehearse the correct things that they did. You can also see maybe if they got the right answer for the wrong reason, which is an important thing for you to know. Some students, you need to repeat this over and over again so that they really can internalize what are they doing correctly. And then if there are some questions or some problems where they aren't putting those steps in, they're more likely to recognize it themselves. So then say, okay, so you did well on question 1, you did well on question 3, you did well on question 4. We've talked about those. Let's go back to 2 and see if there's something here that you recognize that you didn't do as well. And oftentimes then the student will be able to find it. So then, of course, a very important step is to connect what you're doing to future action. So if you get feedback and you don't know what to do with it, even if it's good feedback, sometimes you're just sort of like, okay, now I'm going to move on with my life. Why should I listen to you? But it's important to help students figure out what are they going to do in the future with the information you've given them. So I like to ask students, what do you want to remember in the future? Or what did you do today that you want to remember next time? What do you want more practice with? What are you still wondering about? This is feedback for me, but it also helps them to process some of the things that they've learned and to think about what they're going to do with it going forward. And this is what really helps your tutoring sessions become more of a dialogue where you both know the goal that you're working toward. And while you're helping the student reach that goal, they're also helping to direct that progress. progress, right? And then also it helps you next time when you're presenting your next lesson, you can start by saying, hey, you said you needed more practice with this. So, even though nobody loves to memorize their multiplication tables, you said you wanted to do it. So now we're going to work on it. Okay. So this is just sort of a summary again. So when you're responding to student work, make sure that you're agreeing with the student on what the goal of the exercise is, encouraging them to do some self-evaluation, asking those questions that help them reflect on the work. Always honor the work that they're putting in. Refer to evidence when you're saying what they did well or what they need to work on. Try as best as you can to have them building on strengths so that you're not always just pointing out weaknesses, and help them work to connect that to their future learning. So we have a very small group now. People are dropping like flies. But I was wondering if there are things here that you feel like you already do well, and if there's something here that you would like to work on in your own tutoring or teaching.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it here.